want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.
Hello, Dan Goldfield.
Hello, brother Jesse. How are you?
I'm excellent. It's about
Good.
time. This is amazing. After a year or so of loosely connecting in the online writing space, finally having a full conversation. So very excited.
I'm excited too, brother. Yes, there's always many rich conversations to be had and not enough time to have them. So I'm glad we've carved out this slot.
Yeah, I've been watching you engage with that writing community in the Cortex from early on in the Cortex community.
Yeah.
Dan Co's writing software, and you saw some of my early pieces of writing and gave me some great feedback. And then I started paying more attention to your writing on X over time, and I became very curious about your approach to spirituality and things like meditation. So then I read some of your articles. I stumbled upon your collection of spoken teachings. You have a 70 some short teachings that you recorded from meditation topics to learning how to rest despite sleeplessness, dealing with discomfort, facing mortality, lots of topics. And I really appreciated how you're able to very coherently and concisely, and also in a very soothing, pleasant manner. You have a great voice for that.
Thank you.
Outline these topics. So I've got lots of questions for you.
Perfect. I love questions, both when I ask them and receive them. And sometimes when I just hold on to them for a while. Those talks were my first online content, actually. I first uploaded those talks to a platform called Insight Timer. And they were very kind. They featured me a number of times. And those came out of me following a period of silence. I was really, for a year or so, during one of the first COVID lockdowns here in the UK, really feeling very strongly that there's no way to explain this stuff. There's no way to explain. I mean, how do we use words to explain non-duality? It can't be done, actually. And I was really feeling that. And then it was just on the phone with a Dharma friend one day, and he said, why don't you just talk to the internet like you talk to me? I said, okay, I'll give it a try. So I went home and wrote out a list of topics as long as my arm that I figured, I could actually talk. If I was just talking like I talked to my buddy Chris, yeah, I could do that. And then along with that also was the idea that, hey, is it not better to try, even if we can't actually explain these deep realizations that we have on the path? Is it not better to try? And if one person gets a clue, then I'd say it's worth it. So that was the beginning. So I'm glad you've been enjoying those talks, brother.
Yeah, I like that. At least you can offer a clue.
A clue is good. Yeah.
Well, you say the question of how do you talk about non-duality, and we better give some clue from the start then. So what the heck is that? What is
We
non-duality?
better had. Yes. We better lay down some terms. Non-duality, at the moment, I define as the absence of mentally fabricated boundaries. Which doesn't sound like much on the tin. But if we dig into that a little bit, and for any of our listeners who have already done some study into these kinds of topics, even if not non-duality, but perhaps loosely Buddhism or Zen or any of those Eastern philosophies, teachings, practices, then you may have an understanding that it is the boundaries that we draw that cause our dissatisfaction. For example, I draw a boundary between myself and another person, now they can be my enemy. There's no boundary between us. If they're just appearing as they are, then there's actually no possibility of me attributing to them qualities and characteristics that I then agree or disagree with. Can't be done. This is all function of the mind. Maybe this sounds too good to be true to the uninitiated, that we could actually be free of. We're really talking about being free of interpretation. So that rather than interpreting everything we see in a reactive way, it's not that we lose the ability to think, it's that we think deliberately rather than impulsively. And so interpretation being typically such an instinctive level thing, we can be free of a lot of the reactive judgments that we make, and therein lies our dissatisfaction, therein lies our suffering. So it can also show up in the most ordinary of ways. For example, if any of our listeners have had the experience that one day they might be caught out in the rain and it's just the worst thing that ever happened to them, and they're stressed and they're grumpy and they're soaked through, and this is just the worst thing ever. After the day I've had, now it starts to rain. But rarely we might have the experience, having done no spiritual practice or nothing, we might have the experience of being in the rain and it actually being quite pleasant. It's rain in both instances. It's our interpretation or lack thereof that changes the experience.
So you've mentioned certain fields of thought or traditions sort of pointing toward that kind of freedom, like Taoism or Zen, forms of Buddhism. Is there any traditions or models that have spoken to you the most to bring you that kind of freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. The non-dual teaching has shown up in many cultures across time. In fact, it's pretty easy to interpret the non-dual teaching. See, here's the paradox. We're right back into interpretation. It's pretty easy to interpret the non-dual teaching in any spiritual teaching we pick up. Several teachers of non-duality have had a lot of fun with putting out books or essays or talks on subjects like Jesus was a non-dual teacher. We typically think about Jesus's teaching as a dualistic teaching because he's talking about the Father and the Son. But then if we look a bit more closely at a lot of the language, we see that he's very often implying, at least, that the Father and the Son are one. But the teachings that resonated most with me were the teachings from the East because they speak so directly. So, Advaita Vedanta that comes out of Hinduism was the first non-dual teaching that I discovered. Then it was Zen, and then finally Dzogchen from Tibet, which is their non-dual teaching. I studied Theravada for a long time, a very modern presentation of Theravada Buddhism with the teacher with whom I spent most time. This is a delightful teacher named Dhammarato. He's out on YouTube. And those practices were certainly more dualistic in their flavor, more of the typical kinds of meditation and mindfulness practices that are concerned with changing the mind in some way. Now, some might say that's an unfavorable interpretation. We could also look at those teachings and say, well, they are all in the end about acceptance. That's true. But one of the focuses of that teaching was step 10 of the Buddha's meditation instructions, which is to gladden the mind. This is a deliberate practice to gladden the mind. So we're saying, well, here's the mind doing unwholesome stuff. I'm going to gladden it and make the contents of the mind more wholesome. well, this is dualistic. I got great benefit from this practice and many others that teacher shared with me. But it was the non-dual teachings that say the contents of the mind are just coming and going all the time anyway. You don't need to bother with them. You really can just relax. Take your hands off the wheel, so to speak, and allow for it all to unfold, along with recognition of our nature as awareness as a key point. Those were the teachings that really finally cracked me open, so to speak. Though it's interesting for me to consider, I might never know. I think we would need vast data to make any conclusive statement on this. Did my relativistic practices that I did prior to encountering the non-dual teaching deeply prepare me to hear that teaching deeply, to make that recognition? Or would it have been that if I'd entered into the non-dual teaching deeply first, then I wouldn't have needed those more dualistic practices? Well, I'll never know. And the truth about this kind of question is it's highly individual. Some folks feel that they really need a step-by-step, deliberate progression. Other folks rarely might hear the non-dual teaching ones and be cracked open like a walnut. This is a subject of endless fascination to me, brother. I suspect you as well.
Yeah, the road to liberation seems wrought with paradox.
Indeed.
The tricks of language can be trappings that ensnare the mind, and yet they can somehow snap you out of it at times.
Yeah.
So,
Well, you mentioned Zen just before we started rolling, didn't you? And of course, the koan is a wonderful tool within Zen, using the mind to defeat the mind, so to speak.
yeah, I've sort of aimed to make it my practice to play with the idea of my long-form writings being sort of humorously koan-like in some manner, because writing, you can be so elaborate, outlining complex ideas and concepts that could take a whole book, and yet, you might get just as much at the end of the day from looking at the hummingbird in the tree instead of reading the book. So how can you get someone to pay attention to the language used without becoming ensnared by it?
Well, that is a demonstration of great skill whenever someone pulls it off. And indeed, we can all be learning for a lifetime to better and better attempt such a thing. Because exactly as you say, it is inherently paradoxical. We're attempting to point to the non-dual with the dualistic, language being the dualistic. And the non-dual teaching in itself is a great paradox because we're already there. It is how things are. We are aware, and stuff occurs within that awareness. Though even to say this sets up a duality. Awareness here, stuff there. These two are non-dual. But how else do we speak about it? In the end, there is just this, and then all of these ways that we might talk about it. And indeed, brother, speaking about it in a one-to-many format is even more challenging. In a one-to-one interaction, there's a felt transaction, right? A transmission. As they say in many of the traditions, they talk about the importance of transmission, something that's felt between people who are having these kinds of conversations. In a one-to-many setting, I mean, you're basically setting yourself up to fail with 99% of people who read it. That's just how it's going to go. Very rare for me. I've been at this for 3 years now. I suppose 4 years if I count the Insight Timer content, actually. I never think about it in those terms. It's 3 years ago that I rocked up on Twitter. In that time, very few people have had any kind of penny drop or realization experience from reading something that I've put out for one-to-many consumption. There was one recently, a fellow who'd been on the path for 50 years and then caught my videos and something changed for him, which was just incredible to witness. So we've become friends, as you might imagine. I definitely wanted to talk to that guy. That's rare. That's very rare. Among the thousands of pieces of content I've put out, if I count tweets, more often it's that it will offer enough of an invitation to someone for them to be interested in having a conversation, and then that's where the work is done.
Yeah. So before I ask you more about the work that you've done with people more one-on-one, I've read your mention of non-meditation.
Yeah.
So people, I think that it can be very tricky for people to understand what meditation is quote unquote supposed to be. And even seeing it as a question of what it's supposed to be and then trying to live up to that properly or correctly seems to be something that can be a block from allowing it to be fruitful. So what is non-meditation?
So the way to understand that term non-meditation is to understand another term, dissolving the boundary between meditation and non-meditation. In other words, and this is a term aimed at a practitioner who is at least intermediate. So we're not going to take a beginner and say to them, hey, you should practice non-meditation. They didn't even know what meditation is yet, right? So, a beautifully asked question here, brother. We need to have an idea of what meditation is in order to have some idea of what non-meditation is. But exactly as you said, when we go into a formal, rigid, deliberate practice, most of which are about some kind of fixing ourselves, improving ourselves, purifying ourselves, then exactly as you say, this becomes what the cure becomes the disease for so many folks. Now, certainly an obsession with meditation is better for us than an obsession with cocaine. No denying that, right? We are far better off being one of those meditation practitioners who perhaps needs a hip replacement because they were too determined to sit full lotus than being someone who's banging endless lines of cocaine up their nose, right? There's just an objective hierarchy there. Nonetheless, one of my favorite lines from Ram Dass is, do you want to be a meditator or do you want to be free?
Yeah, that's good.
If we have to do something in order to feel okay, we're still trapped. We're still dependent. So non-meditation is about giving up even meditation and focusing instead on recognition of the always present truth, which is precisely that what is really going on in our direct experience with no conceptual elaborations, no what-ifs, no speculations about what's going on, then what's going on is awareness and a bunch of stuff coming through it. Right? This is what all of those deliberate practices are designed to lead us to. But as you say, very often we get attached to the practice. And so actually, for the past 6 months at least, I would say, though with varying degrees of focus prior to that, my primary concern has been reaching those practitioners. So a lot of the writing that I'm doing right now, certainly the videos that I'm putting out, are for that very specific person who has already done at least a year of practice and is finding that their efforts are no longer returning the kind of results that they like. Effort at a certain point becomes a problem. Typically, people are in the game for longer than a year before this starts to be an issue. But yes, for me, indeed, the cure became the disease. I was so obsessed at one point with gladdening the mind that I couldn't shut down. I couldn't actually relax. I'd taken something that was meant to direct me toward relaxation, contentment, and turned it into an obsession, a compulsion. And it became a grounds for dissatisfaction, exactly what it is designed to dissolve for us. Now, is this the way that my Western mind interacted with an Eastern teaching? Who knows? I mean, there's all kinds of ways that we can speculate. What I can say is how it was in my experience. It was then when I heard that teaching on non-meditation that really nothing need be done to realize who we are. Nothing need be done to, quote, be at peace. We are already at peace. But what really matters is what we mean when we say we, what we mean when we say I, me. If we mean the body, the mind, the feelings, well, there's all kinds of turbulence there. But if we mean awareness, the common ingredient in all of our experience, the basic space in which the body, the mind, the feelings come and go, then we can begin to recognize, oh, I've always been at peace. Nothing has ever bothered me. Nothing has ever harmed me. It can't be done. But when I identify with the contents of awareness, now I can be harmed. Now I can be bothered. Now I can be dissatisfied.
So I've also heard you talk about your experience with dissatisfaction and with tension in the body, and you encountered something called the Alexander technique. If you want to bring that up, I want to know, what would you tell me if I come to you and say, Dan, I'm unhappy, and I'm in pain. My back hurts all the time. I can't stop holding this tension. I'm getting angry at lots of little things that bother me. So what do you mean I'm at peace? How could I be at peace?
Yeah. Indeed, for someone who is experiencing so much discomfort, so much dissatisfaction, to simply say to that person, hey, rest naturally without seeking or describing anything. Nothing need be done. You're fine as you are. That's just the wrong teaching for that person, right? That said, if that person wants to enter into a long-term relationship with me, then we will talk about the non-dual teaching. But what we'll engage in is a kind of a dance, looking at how much, if any, relativistic practice is necessary. Maybe that involves something like Alexander technique. Maybe it involves something like massage. Maybe it involves something like classical meditation. But always in the context of, hey, just as soon as you're able to find that radical acceptance for what is going on in your experience, then we're going to seize that. And we're going to pull on that thread, right? But until then, if your experience is just unbearable, then we can work with the experience. Now, Alexander technique has a hands-on component. So I was training to teach Alexander technique for about 4 years, never actually qualified because COVID hit, and that derailed the whole thing. Very sad, actually. And during that time, we actually lost the head of training, who had about 25 years more experience than anyone else in the organization. So that was a real tragedy, actually, the way that COVID impacted that organization. But even if I had qualified, I wouldn't be doing as much work in the Alexander technique as I would be doing in teaching what I teach online now anyway, just because of that hands-on component. So Alexander technique is about as niche as non-duality, maybe even more so. And so trying to run a local business, teaching Alexander technique is, well, there's very few people doing it in my city, and they've typically been in the organization for 20 years or something. So nonetheless, if anyone listening is in a kind of pain that is resistant to traditional treatments, then I strongly recommend trying to find an ITM Alexander technique teacher. ITM stands for Interactive Teaching Method. That's the name of the organization I train with. And what they will help you to do is to first consider, to explore whether some degree of the trouble that you're experiencing is self-created. In my experience, it was entirely self-created, which was great news, though it didn't feel like it the first time I heard it. I wanted to just be able to go to the chiropractor and get cracked. Right? Well, it was a chiropractor who I saw first who recommended me to an Alexander Technique teacher because she did some muscle testing and saw that it was tension that was my problem. Essentially, I was turning on a bunch of muscle that I didn't have to turn on. I'd just become tense. So that was leading to chronic pain. And so it was through a long study of Alexander Technique that I learned to just stop moving in that way. Turning on muscles is movement. Performing two opposing movements at the same time is tension. So I was just tense all the time, particularly in my upper back. And the root of that tension turned out to be over-efforting. And the over-efforting was caused by a bunch of unhelpful beliefs about myself, such as, I'm not good enough. But my answer to feeling like I wasn't good enough was to try chronically. So it all had fascinating reason. Of course, going into the Dharma practice alongside the Alexander Technique practice was immensely helpful. So that's a little bit about Alexander Technique. It's quite difficult to explain, actually. I've done pretty well here. Famously, within the organization, we would all tell stories of how we fumbled explaining the work to people. Non-duality is really no different. So for some reason, I've ended up interested in these things that are awfully difficult to explain to people and really don't have much adoption among the population. But here we are.
Yeah, it kind of makes me think of a couple of interesting bridge topics. A couple of our mutual friends I'll be speaking with soon, such as Brian Meyerhofer, who's a somatic therapist, and also Dan Coe, who people know him for a variety of his ideas, and some people might know him as someone who can help you learn how to make more money, or someone might think of him as someone who can help you understand how to live more in flow states. But he has a lot of ideas around, ultimately, how to work less, earn more, and enjoy life, is how he likes to put it. And so there are a lot of ideas in our world about earning more requiring working more, and not necessarily being able to enjoy life. You're just supposed to take responsibility and shoulder the burden. And so I'll also bridge it to my experience a little bit. I'll talk about my personal story many times on these episodes, but I experienced chronic pain in my upper back for about 12 years. There's still a little bit going on and some tension on the right side, but for about 12 years, it was severe pain, and I couldn't work labor jobs and I would work the labor jobs because I needed to make money and appear like I'm being responsible, but I would be in severe pain at the end of a day, as if a small knife was stabbing my back or a jagged rock lodged in my back. And I wondered sometimes how I was going to make it through life, right? And it's partly through working with a somatic therapist named Logan Quinn, largely through that work, combined with hitting it from other angles like some massage and chiropractic, and also learning to not be afraid because the x-rays showed no significant issue. So learning to not be afraid to lift some weight and put my body through the type of stress that it's supposed to go through. And it's healed. I'm not living with severe chronic pain now. So that's incredible. And, there's days where I get a little stressed and I carry a lot more tension in my shoulders and neck, and I'll get some headaches here and there. But generally, I have even more acceptance of that, so I can have the headache and see it like, oh, this is a cloudy day, and that's okay. And even those 12 years of pain, they were pretty rough, man, and I empathize deeply with anyone with any amount of chronic pain. It's not easy to live with. But there's a degree to which just simply learning how to be with it instead of running away from it is the thing that makes it manageable.
Yeah.
So it's another pointer toward these sort of paradoxical elements. Yeah. And so the reason I bring up Dan Coe as well is because someone might see some of his ideas as very focused on materialistic desires, for example. Mm. How to make lots of money, right? Mm. And so it's easy to start putting things like working out in the gym or making more money into the materialistic camp. And spirituality is over here on the other side. And meditation is over here on the other side. And if you want to be spiritual, then it's not relevant to you to think about materialistic aspects of your life. You're supposed to have no desire. And to have freedom is to have no desire. So what do you think about, and what's your influence been from our friend Dan, for example, around... What's the question here? The question is...
I hear the question.
I'll trust you.
I hear the question. Yeah. Seems maybe we could articulate it as, how do we bring those two together? People do tend to think about spirituality and the material as incompatible somehow. So is the question, how do we reconcile? Yeah. Beautiful. Well, Dan's influence on me in this was profound. Love Dan and all of his work. And I discovered Dan at a time when I had just come onto Twitter. I was trying to figure it out. I was still, I would say, at the tail end of reconciling this for myself. I still hadn't quite figured out how to articulate to myself how they came together. Much less could I articulate at that time how they supported one another. And this was really the philosophical shift that I was going through when I first encountered Dan and took his courses and was engaging in his communities. The Theravada teacher that I was working with was always dead against me involving money in any way, wherever any kind of Dharma was in the picture, because as I said, he's a good monastic. And it's an incredibly noble way of doing things. I will say I did try to make this work on donations alone. That was the Insight Timer days. I was earning about $30 a month. And one of the things that I realized was that Westerners don't really know how to behave with donations. It's never been a part of our culture, unlike it has been in the East. And I think it's a wonderful, wonderful thing when we can share generosity together, but we've not been trained for it. And it's very noble to say, no, I'm going to be the one who's going to stand up and do this. What we tend to see in the creator economy, of course, is you have to have massive, massive reach to make a donation model work, like we see with some of the video game streamers, for example. That said, the donations are always incentivized, right? So still there is some kind of an exchange going on. And one of the realizations that I had through this period was that actually there was typically an exchange going on when people would make donations to the temples in the East. There was always an exchange, right? There's a transaction. When I looked into the roots of the Buddha's Sangha, he set up the community of monks to give people the opportunity to essentially opt out of 7-day work weeks and go and practice Dharma. And it wasn't that working people had no time to practice Dharma, because of course we're talking about ancient India, right? The Dharma was everywhere in one form or another. But to really dedicate oneself to it when working a 7-day-a-week job, which was what the working class was doing and still does do in a lot of parts of India, I got to see that firsthand. It became clear to me, oh, okay, so the Buddha's saying, okay, if the options are work 7 days a week or practice Dharma 7 days a week, but you'll have no means of your own, you'll be reliant on the community to provide your food. The community as a whole decided, and there was precedent for this, of course, in Hinduism, okay, we will support the monks. We want there to be a group of people who's going off and studying wisdom. They'll give us back wisdom, and we'll give them food. And that was an economic model that worked, right?
Yeah.
Very, very beautiful to really see how that worked at that time, and still does work in some parts of the East. Well, one of the things I had to come to terms with, Jesse, was I live in the UK. I could give away all my stuff, make a robe out of my bed sheets, carve a wooden bowl, and go begging and see what happens. But I know some homeless people, and life isn't good for them. So I decided I was going to start a business. In fact, I was very hesitant. My previous career was in music. I played and taught drums. And more, as I was teaching the Dharma, I would have experiences where I'd be teaching a drum lesson. I'd be working with one of the students who represented really most of my students. Most of my students throughout 20 years of teaching drums were hobbyists. Of course they were. They were coming for something fun to do after school or work or on the weekend. So, of course, what goes along with being a hobbyist? Well, hobbyists don't practice very much, typically, right? So I'm there giving a drum lesson to someone who hasn't practiced since the last time I saw them, and we're going through the motions, and, it's the same lesson I've taught them a dozen times already. Meanwhile, my phone's buzzing in my pocket, and it's a Dharma student. And they've just, I would find out later, had a panic attack, or taken too many mushrooms, or broken up with their spouse, or had some crazy deep insight in meditation. And I'm thinking, there's two things I could be doing with this moment. My insistence that I shouldn't involve money in this means I have to do one thing and not the other. You were talking about your experience continuing to work manual jobs because you just have to, right? So I decided I was going to start a business, finally. And it was August that I signed up for Twitter. It was October that I met Dan. And I just dove in head first. And from October to April of the following year, so that was October 22 to April 23, I made essentially a degree level study of Dan's material, and that culminated in a $10,000 launch, teaching mindfulness to a cohort of 12, and I actually picked up my first serious one-to-one client through that promotion as well, and closed the music business and never looked back. And yes, indeed, you're right that someone who, glancing at Dan's teachings, might interpret them as materialistic, depending on the topic of conversation, of course, but there's so much depth behind that. And that was what drew me to Dan, was this guy is not just talking about how to make a quick buck. He's not just talking about how to look good. There is a philosophy behind this, and it is robust. That was what pulled me down the rabbit hole. I suspect it was the same for you, brother. What do you think?
I would say so. Yeah, I mean, I definitely was hooked in by the idea of figuring out how to monetize a type of work that wasn't wrecking my body. And it was mostly after discovering him and starting the online writing journey, going on a big adventure in the desert down in Nevada, California, Arizona. It was throughout this past year that I became free from that back pain. So now, whatever I'm doing, I could do more manual labor if I want to tend to my garden or help a friend with some help a friend move. Or now it's not going to put me in that position of extreme pain, but now I'm also in more of a position to think about how can I keep my fridge from being empty while doing something that feels much more meaningful than building cabinets for some company that doesn't matter to me at all. So yeah, Dan really helped me understand a lot of things about, I would say, the spirituality of business. And I'm excited to have him on the podcast soon as well. And the whole creator economy topic. A lot of people look to him as one of the thinkers in the creator economy who has inspired them to enter in. So,
Indeed, he has a rich alumnus. Is that the correct word? We don't tend to use those words in the UK. That's right, isn't it? An alumni is someone who's, or is alumnus the singular?
oh, this is beyond me.
Yeah. We'll defer to our audience. Someone leave us an educational comment, please.
Yeah.
But yes, lots of people have been through Dan's courses, communities, etc., and come out better for it. And what greater qualification for a man is there, or woman?
Yeah. So with this creator economy topic, that's even a term that a lot of people still haven't heard of. And you've been quite involved in partly Dan's community with Dan Coe's community on the Cortex Discord and helping a lot of people understand how to improve their writing and how to improve their ability to provide valuable information or provide or to build an audience to then provide with something valuable. How would you define the creator economy? What's going on with that?
Good question. I'm aware, actually, brother, that although we ended up in a wonderful place, we didn't quite close the thread on that question. How do we reconcile the spiritual with the material? So perhaps we'll wrap the creator economy into this. What I realized more and more as my own spiritual recognition deepened was that where it leads is to being of benefit. I first heard this idea in a talk given by a wonderful teacher named Ziji Rinpoche, also known as Candice O'Denver. Someone asked her, how do we know if someone's really enlightened? In the context of course, there are a lot of charlatans out there, a lot of folks who would proclaim themselves to have some degree of realization. Ziji Rinpoche said, it's so simple. She said, someone who's enlightened is of benefit. And when I've heard other teachers speak on this, they will delightfully mention how many people can be, quote, enlightened without ever having read a single Buddhist text or ever sat in meditation. Of course, that word enlightenment is often loaded, but we can talk about a kind of enlightenment being enacted by a nurse who is working in crisis, who is not thinking of herself or himself, but is just serving. This is what the Tibetans call enlightened intent, or naturally arising beneficial intent. And it actually is our default mode, confirmed by the millions of practitioners who have simply gotten quiet enough to recognize it. And when we recognize it, it's as natural as sneezing. This is what has fueled this entire 3-year creative stint that I've been on. I wake up in the morning full of ideas for how can I help people? And that is what the creator economy runs on, one way or another. Now, of course, someone could enter into the creator economy for selfish reasons, but they don't tend to do very well. Why? Because the online market has sophisticated to the degree that we can smell a charlatan a mile off. People are very good at spotting inauthenticity these days, which is why it's one of the things that leaders like Dan talk about so much. Authenticity is so important. So it's easy then to reconcile the spiritual with the material, because it just so happens that we have a wonderful way to leverage benefit in 2025. It's called a business. Now, when I came into the creator economy, when I came online, certainly before any of that, I thought business and sales and marketing were dirty words, pointing to dirty things, like so many of us do. And then it was Dan and some others who re-educated me on that. More recently, I've really been enjoying the works of Seth Godin, who teaches a wonderful set of principles that hinge on empathy. In a very real sense, we could call marketing, as it's taught by Seth Godin, an act of love. He talks about doing hard emotional labor for the benefit of the people that you're trying to serve. What does that emotional labor look like? Well, it looks like trying to understand them, trying to reach them, trying to speak the language that they speak. The selfish creator speaks their own language. The generous creator learns about the people that they're seeking to serve and builds a bridge to them. And this is a lot of work. It takes a lot. Because why? The human beings are complex. Right? Language is complex. Problems are complex. So if we want to demonstrate to someone that we can solve a problem of theirs, we have work to do. But it can be delightful work, and it can even be effortless work. Even though Seth calls it hard emotional labor, if we're running on the fuel of naturally arising beneficial intent, then indeed it does feel as natural as sneezing. I can't imagine anything else I'd rather be doing. So that's what the creator economy is to me, and I think we did a pretty good job there of closing that open loop of reconciling spirituality with the material. And I suppose to finally close it, that one little remaining inch would be just that money is a natural consequence of this. That we think about what's the most material thing there is. Well, money, it's entirely abstract. And the object of many, many people's greed, well, we don't have to be greedy to get money. We can just serve people, and the money comes as a natural consequence. Maybe not as fast as it does to those who are greedy, but over a longer period of time in this creator economy, I would be prepared to bet that those who put service first will win in the long run.
I love that. That was beautifully put. I think that clarifies a lot of things.
Good. Thank you, brother.
I'm very excited about what's coming next year for the creator
Me too.
economy. And I believe that you and I are going to embrace with a hug in Vancouver, British Columbia.
That's right, brother. I can't wait. I will be grinning ear to ear in that moment. You can bet on it.
So the creator economy convention is happening. And somehow the blessing of getting to be a primary organizer of this event has fallen on my lap. and all these amazing people who I've been inspired by while I'm entering into this world of online business are going to be there and speaking to however many people show up. And so I'm working hard behind the scenes and also aiming to balance that hard emotional labor with the effortlessness of naturally arising beneficiality. So that's a
Beautiful.
fun learning curve, and part of why I'm
Oh
so
yeah.
excited to be talking to you about it. So I'm sure we'll have more conversations over time leading up to the event. But what are you excited to share with people? What would you like to be? How would you like to be of benefit when we're gathered in person and people are going to be listening to you talk? What do you talk about?
Yeah. Here's one of the things I love the most about this natural force of benefit. There really is nothing special. It's just who we are. Any of us who get quiet enough just find that we want to do good. It's just how it is. It's been proved by millions of practitioners before us. One of the things about it is that it really kind of has a life of its own. I could show up with nothing planned to this event, and it would just all unfold beautifully because the energy that is present will take us all on a wonderful ride. I'm sure of it. We're all going to be so excited. And indeed, folks who are coming to the event would have traveled, they would have bought a ticket. They themselves are opting in a pretty big way. So there will be a tremendous energy about the event. But that said, I will make some plans. Maybe I'll throw them away in the course of the event, but I will. I'll think about some things to say. I know you and I were talking about perhaps a talk on spirituality alone and then a talk on spiritual business, so to speak. Well, in any talk on spirituality, my first concern is to give people this direct pointing to their nature as awareness, as has been the concern of teachers of non-duality throughout culture and time. This is the greatest gift I could give anyone. I will expect a smaller crowd at that talk than on the spiritual business talk. Why? Because as you just kind of touched upon there, brother, well, we do like a, what shall we say, a tangible result to aim for. And so, and this is one of the reasons why Dan's content is so effective. He's so good at putting that ROI up front and then underpinning it with the philosophy. So it tends to be that we have smaller crowds for spirituality. Why? Because the return is much less tangible, much less direct. The returns tend to be indirect. I just put out a video today telling the story of a student of mine who used the practice to weather 6 months of no or low revenue in his business, then to break through and earn 250K in 75 days. So it works. There's just typically a bit of a delay. It's a less direct ROI. But that will be the thrust of the spirituality talk. And I always like to try to make those talks interactive. I like to make any talk I give interactive, honestly. Whenever I'm addressing a group, I like to get a sense of where the people in the room are at. Now, that is a luxury afforded to those who are speaking smaller crowds. Of course, if you have a crowd of hundreds, it's difficult to really get a measure. But I suppose you can do a raise of hands and that kind of thing. So I'll be thinking about that. Because I think one of the most important things a speaker can do is, well, speak to the people who are actually in the room, which is why I tend to make less plans whenever I'm addressing a group and try to do something more interactive. But I suppose what we were just talking about regarding the reconciliation of the spiritual with the material, would be a good thing to speak about at the Spiritual Business Talk. This force of natural benefit and how it can drive our actions, how we can rely on that to take us through that hard emotional labor of understanding our audience. Another angle that I've been thinking about as well is I've found myself inclined towards a business model that is more focused on depth than breadth. And this has been a dance over, 3 years, really. Constantly watching signals of what my content does and the feedback that I get, both from platforms and people. Those of us who teach deeper topics are always going to struggle to get reach. It can be done. The way that Dan positions deep topics is an endless source of fascination to me. But it ain't easy. He might tell us otherwise. He might say, come on, man, just read the course again.
Yeah.
But there is a growing movement, mostly focused on YouTube, that I've seen, of very successful creators getting success for their clients. They are teaching YouTube, and they're getting success for their clients by encouraging them to do what Seth Godin encourages, which is to serve a minimum viable audience deeply and powerfully, and then watch that expand. So I've been experimenting with that and making my videos very focused on that individual who is finding that the spiritual practices they've been engaged in have stopped bearing fruit, finding that they're burning out applying effort, and so to go the other way, to go in the direction of non-meditation. Well, that's pretty specific. There's no algorithm out there that's going to pick that up and start showing it to people on the kind of For You page while they're logged out, you know. So what I found from that is, it put me in contact with this 50-year practitioner who suddenly found that my teachings were what made the difference for him. Well, I mean, how do we quantify that? So that could be an interesting angle for that talk, to represent that way of going about things, that's uniquely suited, I feel, to folks who want to talk about really deep, really nuanced topics. And of course, I've set up a whole funnel there that gives people like Paul, that long-term practitioner, the opportunity to actually contact me, which is a kind of directness that, of course, we can't sustain if we're doing huge numbers. So I would certainly have a more handsome bank balance if I were doing those huge numbers. But what I have right now is folks like Paul coming through, having these life-changing experiences because I put out a video that is for him. Maybe that would be an angle, but I suspect you and I could have some fun brainstorming sessions, brother, on what we feel would be most potent for the audience that arrives. Indeed, I suspect we'll have some opportunities to learn about the audience that will be present before they even walk through the door.
Yes.
Why don't we use that to tell us what to talk about?
Yes, I think we'll be able to engage with a lot of the people leading up to the big weekend. So
perfect.
I have a suspicion that a lot of people are like me, and it's easy to get distracted by feeling like the money's not there yet. I want to get the money so that I feel more supported to build bigger and not be so worried about all these subscription fees. And you know, sometimes it feels like it costs money to make money. So then you get distracted by wanting the ROI at the closer to the front end. For me, though, it's also been hugely relevant to have these experiences, such as when I was on that adventure down in the desert, escaping from Canadian winter. And I didn't spend much money. I spent $160 to get a plane ticket to Las Vegas. I got picked up by someone from California who brought me to this date ranch, And I spent 7 weeks living on a date ranch surrounded by beautiful palm trees and cacti and coyotes wandering everywhere and a roadrunner that would walk right up to me while I'm working on some writing.
Mm.
And there were times like I found some top secret gems of the earth to hang out and soak in the beauty. And I felt like, although I was a couple of hours away from Las Vegas, where all the slot machines are spinning and everyone wants to win the jackpot, I had this deep peace upon me, realizing I got the jackpot. So the money's not there yet, but I think there's something we want to understand about life, which is that the money can be lost once you have it. And any material possessions, as useful and beneficial as they could be, they can be lost. So there has to be, I think, a primary lottery winning or jackpot winning before the money comes. And it seems like part of even what you're talking about is how that effortlessness, arriving at that state where it becomes effortless, actually makes it come faster, or is what allows it to come in.
That's how it happened for me. I was earning $40 an hour for 20 years as a music teacher. And I would say on average, probably about the same as a performer. I suspected strongly that I would be earning even less than that if I followed this thread of teaching the Dharma and how to reconcile the money thing, and it just all seemed like a minefield. So I did not enter into this as a business opportunity. I entered into this because I, in a sense, had no choice. It was abhorrent to me that I was leaving those students who really needed me out in the cold because I had to do this other thing for money. But then sure enough, following that thread of where can I be of most benefit led me to, I don't know, I think last I wrote about it, I 4x'd my income. Like total, kind of in a yearly sense. That first one-to-one client that I found during that first promotion after I'd studied Dan's material, he alone replaced my music tuition income. Not because I said, hey, where can I earn money? Because goodness knows if my concern had been money, I'd have been in crypto or drop shipping or whatever. AI something or other. But again, because I pulled on the thread that said, where can I be of most benefit? Could I be earning more money? Sure. But I'm definitely earning more money than I was before in direct proportion to how much benefit I'm doing. And now, of course, brother, you're about to do great benefit with this event. And we all know it. We can smell it in the air. And although, of course, a physical event is a very different thing to teaching something online, my sincere hope is that you are rewarded in proportion to the benefit that you're bringing about through all of this.
Well, I believe it'll bring in some money, but I know for sure it will be something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. And
yeah.
That's another one of those things where no matter how much, and there'll be a lot of work involved, and I do need to eat, but that type of reward is a jackpot on its own. And so I carry that feeling with me now that I get to just keep winning the jackpot,
Yeah. Yeah. Now, another way that these kinds of things can sometimes play out, isn't it, is that with this idea, you are effectively placing yourself in the center of this economy of which we're all part, or at least our little corner of it. Well, how are you not going to be soaking up the wisdom of all the creators who have come before you, all these creators to whom you're giving this wonderful platform? You've given yourself the ringside seat. You're in the ring. You're Dana White.
Yeah, it feels like the best idea I could have had, because I could have just pushed and, oh, I just need to build my audience on X. I just need to
Uh-huh.
keep spending more time writing better stuff on X. And a lot of Dan Coe's stuff encourages people to learn how to do deep work and then learn how to rest and maximize
Yeah.
true leisure, not by watching Netflix, but by going on walks or practices that bring real rest, and then aiming for something like a 4-hour workday. It sort of condenses the challenge in such a way that your skill level has to meet this edge and
Mm.
go into a state of flow where all of your mental faculties become available. It brings you more into a state of deep presence. And suddenly it turns out that your goal of making more money and working less is making you enjoy life more before the money even comes, because you're in flow
Yeah.
states. So
Yeah.
what a beautiful thing. It's very,
Isn't it?
very profound when
Yeah.
you start to experience it directly.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm
Yeah.
so excited to spend time with you and with him and Mr. Meyerhofer, whose somatic work is still helping me further increase my ability to regulate my body and regulate stress. And so that's exciting. And a lot of other wonderful, incredible, unique people that
Yeah.
suddenly I get to spend a lot of time with.
Yeah.
So indeed, the idea came, and I feel blessed to get to work on it.
We feel blessed to have you, Jesse. And indeed, the kind of the climax of that conversation, I suppose, is that, yeah, events are very, very difficult to set up. I've never done one myself, but I've known many people who run events, and they have a way of sucking up any profit that might have been made, right? But the experience of being in the ring for you, the experience of being the Dana White of the creator economy, it's not quite a bullseye of an analogy, but it'll do for now.
I'll take it.
Yeah, I struggle to imagine that not having an indirect effect on your own brand.
Yeah,
How could it not?
for sure. For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And an opportunity to show my face in person with a bunch of these people who I don't know yet, who I'm
Mm.
going to see them working towards the same thing. And what a beautiful thing to get to be there at the beginning of lots of people's journeys, and to see people who are further along, meeting each other, finding mentors, finding students, finding business partners, and having a good time. And also a chance to speak. So I used to be more of a speaker. I was a magician when I was a kid, and
Great.
I was in front of crowds all the time back then. So I
Yeah.
got a little more used to being in front of crowds than most people, which it's a very common anxiety to be
Uh,
public speaking. And because it's been so long now, like 15 years almost since I retired from magic, um, my knees will shake a little bit. I'll tremble, and if I'm holding a piece of paper in my hand trying to give a talk, it'll be doing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but you take some deep breaths, and you learn how to enter that flow. And I think, as you said, there's something about preparing, but then putting your preparation aside
Mm.
and just being present with the people who are actually in front of you. There's a lot to be said for learning how to improvise that way, which is actually another question I'd like to ask you, which is, because listening to those recorded talks that you did in the what was it called, the
Insight timer.
Insight time, um,
Timer
Insight
with
timer.
an ER. Yeah. Yeah.
So
It started off as an app that was just a meditation bell. And then
Okay.
they started adding features, and it's huge now. That they have thousands of teachers uploading talks now.
Oh, okay. Well, what I noticed right off the bat when I started hearing your talks is you sound very relaxed, and I'm not sure how much of those are entirely scripted, but the way you articulate ideas is very concise and coherent. And I'm wondering how much of that is a developed skill for you? How much past experience did you have with writing and speaking compared to the skill level that you now have with that?
Mm, mm. So I've experimented a lot with scripted versus improvised talks, and in the intermediate step, bullet points. To this day, sometimes I script, sometimes I bullet point, sometimes I just rant. And it is often a question of how many precise points am I trying to make on a topic? If it's too many to even remember with bullet points. And on video, of course, it takes on another life. So those Insight Timer talks were audio only. Hence, I could have as many notes in front of my face as I wanted, or I could just read off of a script. I do find that something is lost in the reading of a script. Perhaps there are people who have been doing it longer than I, who have figured out how to both read from a set script and make it sound entirely natural. What I find is lost is the sense of dialogue with oneself. When we're improvising, we're discovering something as we speak, right? When something is scripted, it's already discovered. I love speaking from a script because I know that I've been able to get every single point that I want to communicate down on that script. But there is a trade-off. So I dance between these three levels, you might say. Fully scripted, bullet pointed, and then completely improvised.
Yeah.
I was teaching drums for 20 years before I came out online. So I had an awful lot of practice with communicating complex ideas. I would teach advanced students and have to explain to them how the great drummers not only played what they played, but a lot of what I would cover with advanced students would be why a drummer chose to play what they played. And you can hear how this begins to move in the direction of the kind of thing that I'm teaching now. We're talking about the mind, we're talking about the heart, we're talking about expression, temperament. I would also cover topics with students more and more actually as the career progressed, and certainly then as there was this overlap with my study of the Dharma and my study of Alexander technique more and more, then I would speak to students more deeply about things like confidence, self-expression, who they were that day when they sat down at the drum kit, what they wanted to say. So I suppose we could say my teaching practice became more holistic as I went on. So I definitely have had a lot of practice speaking. Writing is something that I've always done and enjoyed. I used to write like fanfics as a kid and role-play forums, things like that. And that was always great fun. And then, yeah, I've kind of just always enjoyed like crafting a good email, right? I know that I've done other bits of writing as well. I think I wrote a book for drummers one time. It never published it or anything, but I did it and it was fun. So yeah, writing has always been there. What I had never considered, what was new to me when I came into the creator economy, was the whole other side of writing, which is the who is it for. I'd always really written for myself. Even when I was communicating, really, I was writing to get my point across. So though I knew very well where to put the commas, I hadn't studied in any way how to make my writing valuable to others. So that was the major learning curve then coming into the creator economy.
There's so much to be said for how much you learn by teaching. And
Oh, yeah.
it's been called the protege effect, but experiencing it is something else. You know, there's topics that I've been interested in for 10 years and dabbled in reading about and writing about. And then I put myself under the pressure of people expecting to learn it from me. And suddenly I learned 10 times more in a 1/10 of the time.
Yeah.
And learned way more probably than the people I was supposed to teach it to. But suddenly then I felt more credible, you know, I felt more like the next time around I'll be able to do it with greater clarity. So it's very cool to realize that just going for it sort of before you feel ready can be the very thing that's most effective in making you ready.
Yes.
Yeah, the protege
Yes.
effect is powerful.
Isn't it?
Well, Dan, in the spirit of not overcomplicating freedom for people, I suppose maybe I could ask you to see if you have some kind of summary for people about how to find rest in a life that can feel so demanding and uncomfortable and restless at times. What would be the main thing you'd just tell any given person?
I encourage people on the whole to consider the possibility of making a recognition of what is already so, as opposed to going the usual route that we go when we say, how can I find more rest? We try to create a time in our day where we can sit and do something like meditation. That very often in modern life just creates more stress. Now I have to find more time that I don't have. So this teaching of non-duality is uniquely suited to our modern life. And it just so happens as well that with our increased understanding of the mind comes, I think, and this is somewhat still at the level of a theory, but I see evidence for it. Maybe it's just that I'm lucky enough to encounter individuals for whom this is true. But I see evidence for that more and more people are ready to recognize what is being pointed at in the non-dual teaching, which is this. Who we really are, what we really are is awareness. Why? Well, because it's the common ingredient in all of our experience. Every experience we've ever had of the body has come and gone. Every experience you've ever had of the mind, the feelings, has come and gone. Every experience you've ever had of ourselves, whatever we take ourselves to be, has come and gone. Our memories come and go. Our characteristics come and go. Everything comes and goes. That is its nature. Of course, we can have similar experiences, but they're never quite the same. And this is one place where this is a great way to demonstrate where a more typical kind of meditation practice can come into the picture. A typical meditation practice can train us to dial up our resolution on seeing, in a very general sense, the way we observe. If we speak to someone who's never even had a brush with these kinds of teachings, they might tell us, well, I'm anxious all the time. I have anxiety. And they really experience that anxiety to be the same, like a solid block in their experience that is unmoving, unchanging. But if they dial up their resolution, they see, no, it's changing all the time. It's changing all the time. At the very least, no matter how much we're suffering, we might hear a joke that just tickles us in the right way. And we laugh for a second, and we're no longer anxious. But then it comes back. Now, in our typical way of being, we don't register that gap in the anxiety as something significant. But oh boy, is it significant, is everything. Because it shows us it's not solid. It's not solid. And then as we dial up our resolution of seeing, we can see actually that anxiety is never the same. In fact, never have I ever had the same experience twice. I could say similar. We can all say similar, certainly. I'll give you that. But never quite the same. But what is the same about all of our experience is we're aware. Awareness is that by which, in which, as which, and through which all experience is known. And so if we simply turn our attention to recognizing this as the basis of all of our experience, then we recognize a spaciousness, a rest, which has always been there, but which we never thought was significant. Now we don't have to meditate to find rest. We realize we are at rest. That is our nature. It's the turbulence then that comes and goes within that space. And this, of course, is pretty much as far as a one-to-many teaching can take us, because it's beyond this point that I will have a conversation with someone. Okay, well, how much is going on in your experience? And yeah, if you're in chronic pain, for example, like I was, you probably feel like you can't access that rest. It's somehow just not available to you. Why? Because you're so in opposition to your experience that you can't see the space around it. One of my other favorite Ram Dass stories is he was staying at someone's home somewhere one time. He was giving a talk and he saw a picture on the wall that he found curious. It was just grey. It was just grey in a picture frame. He said, "What's the story with that?" So the host told him, "Take it down and unclip the back." So he took it down and unclipped the back and pulled it out, and he found the canvas inside was folded. So he unfolded it, and he found it was a picture of a cloud. There was blue sky around the outside. If our frame is too small, all we see is the cloud.
Oh, wow.
And we can't tell it's a cloud when our frame is that small. We have to find a way to expand our frame. In other words, our way of seeing, in order to see things as they really are.
Okay. So if someone really enjoyed your way of communicating these things, where would you send them to connect with you further?
I would send them first of all to my YouTube channel right now. I do have a website, dangoldfield.com, but if you search Dan Goldfield on YouTube, that's where my main focus is right now, and it's where I'm talking about these kinds of things that we've been on today most frequently and most deeply. I'm on X as well, really just using X at this point for kind of daily reminders. But like I said, my focus right now is those folks who are a bit tired of their spiritual practice. Also talking to folks who are tired of the hopping around. We have access to more teachings than we've ever had in history. Is really unprecedented. And for that reason, none of the ancient teachings talk about it. So this is something for us to deal with as 21st century practitioners. And so I've had a lot of good feedback to talking specifically about the kind of fatigue that comes with having tried dozens of spiritual practices and finding none of them quite work. What do? Well, we zoom out, like the picture frame. We zoom out and we see, oh, all of my spiritual practices as well have been happening in that same basic aware space. Wonderful. I don't have to figure out which one of them is right anymore. And from that zoomed out vantage point, we can instead look at their common essence. Is there a common truth to which these teachings pointing? And yet, none of them, no authentic teaching, shall we say, will lead you anywhere but awareness. So how's that for one session, brother? I think we covered a lot there, hey?
Beautiful. Absolutely. Yep. I'll share those links in the description everywhere that this goes up. And I really dig your approach to teaching on these things. So this was immensely enjoyable. Thank you for spending this time with me, brother.
Thank you, brother. And I know you're a sophisticated practitioner yourself and someone who pays great attention to all of this. So your vote of confidence means a lot to me. Thank you.
I'll take it. Thank you, good sir.
Mm-hmm.
Very much a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon, man.
Good.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed that as much as I did. That was super fun and quite insightful. So, if you want to join us at the Creator Economy Convention, June 5th to 7th, 2026, go to thelivinginternet.com. The dead internet is not going to win. We're creating a movement of soulful creation in the online space that is backed by in-person events, and it's going to be something truly special. Right now, we are releasing 50 founder tickets at $200 off. There's 600 seats in total, and when you join, when you get a ticket, you'll get access to the Circle community where we're already getting to know each other. There will be some free courses going up there, and we're going to help facilitate the creation of accountability groups where you and 3 or 4 other people will form an alliance and start meeting regularly to hold each other accountable to your creative process. And it's not mandatory, but it's of immense value that we're going to help you link up with other real go-getters, passionate creators who are actually going to meet with you in person next year at the event in Vancouver, British Columbia. So it's going to be something truly magical. And if you're excited about that, then I can't wait to meet you. See you in Vancouver. And if you enjoyed this episode, please do help us reach more people by hitting that like button and subscribe to be alerted about the next episode.